Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, which you can find on YouTube under Annette Talks, or also now on Rumble, just in case YouTube decides to censor me some more. All right, so today it's, I have to be honest, this topic's going to be difficult for me. I've already cried like 3 times about it, but we're going to be talking about this book, Hubener versus Hitler, and it's about Helmuth Hubener, who was, well, we'll get into that. And there's also a documentary. And just to help me and back me up, I have a guy that knows even more about this than I do, because for some reason it's become a hobby, and who used to be in the same university ward with me, oh, quite some time ago. I have Mr. Jimmy Hawley. Hi, Jimmy.
Hello. Greetings.
Is this where you go into like, I don't know how to talk? All right, just to crack the ice, because you and I have not seen each other's faces or been in person with each other since like the 90s or something. Sometime.
Probably 1992 or 3.
Yeah. So
30 years.
That is 30. Oh my gosh, we're old.
Yes.
So anyway,
I still have my red hair.
You reminded me, or you told me, I don't remember it, but you told me how we first met over Facebook. And so I want you to share that with the audience.
Well, I was brand new in the ward. I had just graduated high school and had moved to Tempe, and I had not been around church or church dances for a while. I'd been out of the church for a while, and we were at a little meet and greet after church, which was encouraged by our leader. In fact, they had a name for it. You remember they called it Linger Longer.
Linger Longer. Yeah. What was that? Yeah. That was at the church then. Okay.
Yeah, it was at the church. It was like in the gymnasium behind the chapel. And I was standing there. I don't know if had been talking to somebody, but I was just standing there alone, really didn't know anyone. And you just approached me and just made this. At the time, I didn't find it hilarious. I didn't know what I had found it, but in retrospect, it was hilarious. You said something to the effect of, "So what's up with the Blue Jean Ensemble?" Because I think I was wearing a sort of an acid wash denim shirt with like a corresponding tie. And he said, "Did you fall into the gap or something?" And I just kind of remember, well, and then you said something very witty and moved on. I just remember feeling flush, like, what do you mean by that? Am I a dork?
You know, I have 30. Do I owe you an apology from 30 years ago when I embarrassed you at Linger Longer?
Well, I don't think anyone else heard. I think you just walked up to me and said that, and I didn't know. Was she complimenting me, or was
it was probably?
Am I a dork?
It was probably my awkward way of getting some attention. Who knows? Well, I would have been like 20 at the time, or 21.
I was 18.
Yeah, so I would have been 20. And yeah, not too smooth. So anyway.
Well, I thought you were terrific. We became friends after that. I don't know why I remember you. I obviously remember you a little better than you remember me. But you don't forget a name like Mashler.
No.
You know, and I remember the Yuma. I'm a hayseed from Buckeye, and I remember you were from Yuma, and so we kind of had that Western Arizona farm dairy ruggedness about us. And I just remember, and so with as much as I hate Mark Zuckerberg, I will forever be grateful for the invention of, I guess I should thank Al Gore, the internet and social media, because all the connections. I'm a very nostalgic person. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to connect with old mission friends and old university ward friends or high school friends, it's awesome. And we can see all our loved ones and old friends and families and contacts without actually having to talk to them if we don't want. We can just see what's.
Yeah, we control it, right?
Yeah, well, it's like having them in an aquarium, and they're all there, and you can see them, and we can stay in touch.
Stalk them. We can Facebook stalk them and see what they're doing with their lives and stuff. And I guess
that can be fun.
Yes, it can. All right, before we bore people to death with our reminiscing,
okay,
we are going to get into this topic. And for those of you that haven't researched this at all, you really need to, because Helmuth,
inside or outside the church, it's a good story.
Both, but especially inside the church, because you know what? For some reason, we as a membership don't know. Like, I had sort of a vague idea of something about a guy did something, but I didn't really know the whole story until I started seeing people on Facebook talking about it in depth. And I thought, wow, I've got to get a hold of that book and get this story, because he was a member of the church. And so, for us that are members, we feel a little bit, I don't know, outsider and a little different. And so it's nice when we find something that like makes us feel like we connect to the rest of the world. And hey, look at us. We have a cool guy. We had a cool guy, right? I mean, like we like to say, oh, Gladys Knight joined the church. Hey, we got a cool lady, right? So we like to claim some of these people that make us feel a little bit more, I don't know, acceptable or cool to the outside world.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more than that with this story, because Helmuth, he spelled his name Helmuth, but it used to be spelled Helmet, and then he added an H. I don't know why.
You say Helmet.
So I just think of him as Helmet. But
Yeah.
What he went through in Nazi Germany in the 30s has some parallels to now, which we'll get into later on. And so something that I never would have thought that we would have to deal with in this country is now something that we're having to deal with in this country. Like, I never would have thought I would pick up a book on Nazi Germany and see some scary parallels in this country. Not in a million years. Other countries, yes, but not this country. But here we are. So since you have like this, you feel really connected to this story, you've done a lot of research and you've read more, even more than I have. And I also want to recommend the documentary to people out there. What's it called? Truth and Conviction?
Truth and Conviction. Yeah. By Matt Whitaker. He's an LDS film producer.
And it's very powerful. That's one of the reasons I was crying. I mean, the book made me cry. The movie, the documentary made me cry. The whole idea just, it's very touching, but especially with what's going on right now. So Jimmy, lay the table for us, because you were going to go start a timeline to kind of explain how Helmuth ended up where he was at and what happened to him.
Well, okay, and again, there's two basic viewpoints that have relevance. I'll start off with what we were talking about before we started recording, which is the LDS viewpoint. But on that note, a lot of the story won't make sense or have a lot of meaning if you remove the church part of it. He wasn't just a member of the church. His grandparents were active members. So he was multi-generational member of the church. And the church's influence in foreign countries for the ideals that we take for granted, there's no way to overstate how powerful that is. The ideals of free agency and self-determination and liberty and all these dirty words that really piss off totalitarians.
Well, one of the things I'm glad you raised that, because at the end of the book, and I didn't even think about this while I was reading it, but the question was, why did Helmuth, this kid in 1930s Germany, when he was 16 when he started doing stuff, why was he so democracy minded? Like, he wasn't raised in a democracy.
What drove him to do that?
And so the answers were the church and missionaries that came from the US, and those really influenced him. I also think, honestly, I think a lot of it too is innate in all of us. I think every human being has an innate love of freedom because of the pre-existence and the war in heaven. Like, we all chose agency, right?
Right.
So it may be buried in a lot of us, but it's in there. And so once something comes along to sort of remind you or wake you up to that, then it's like, yes. So I think every human being is born with that. It's just that it's not brought out, it's not emphasized, it's not educated into people who are born in other countries that are not democracies. So it's interesting that he was not, and he was 16, and but yeah, he knew these missionaries he was friends with, and they would come and tell him about America and the church. Like you said, we believe in free agency, and we believe in being born with the right to do what we want to do. Right. Freedom. So you're right that the church can't be separated from this story.
Yeah, it really can't. Helmuth Hubener was greatly influenced by American missionaries. He was also a voracious reader. In fact, that was one of the things that really, again, I don't mean to sidetrack myself, but one of the things that really threw the arresting and interrogating officers off, it took them a long time to really be convinced that he was the author. to all the anti-propaganda he was putting out, because of all the quotes of Schiller, William Tell, Shakespeare, even some references to H.C. Andersen, The Emperor's New Clothes. Helmuth Hubener was a very, very well-read and articulate kid, which was why he had been made the assistant to the ward secretary, because he could type really fast, and he was in charge of typing letters to the church members who were in the war, including Helmut had two brothers who were also Nazi soldiers, were German soldiers.
Right.
And it was his one brother, Gerhard, that he was closest to. He's the one that actually brought him home the radio from France. I believe it was France, and which is where all the trouble began. But Helmut.
Sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
Say Helmut had always been. He loved history, and he loved news, and he was a very patriotic kid. He was an enthusiastic member of the Hitler Youth when he was a little kid. And you got to remember, he was born in 1925. So when Hitler was elected in 1933, Helmut was 8. And all of a sudden, they had food, they had money, they had prosperity. He got the country working. Okay.
And the country was in dire straits because of
the Versailles Treaty.
Right.
You can't, you can't talk about World War II without talking about the Versailles Treaty. And how could somebody like Hitler come to power? Well, you humiliate and impoverish a people, and you're fertilizing the ground for a voice of revolution, which is what Hitler was.
So that's what he was 8 when Hitler came in, and they actually voted him in. People always wonder, how could that be? But I think that you laid the table for that. Obviously, they didn't want to spend 50 years in a depression, or however long that was going to last. Right. And also, I think growing up in our country, when we hear the word Nazi, we tend to automatically think of Gestapo or the SS, right? We don't think about the fact that this was a political party, right? And so there were a lot of Nazis in Germany that just meant that they belonged to the political party. Doesn't mean that they were going around necessarily doing anything wrong. They just belonged to the party.
It was the National Socialist Party. And it was big government on steroids.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
And they bought into it because, like you said, they were starving and they wanted to get back to work. And there, and even when Hitler was ready to go to war, he promised that they were going to, of course, be victorious everywhere, right? They were going to get their rightful place back after World War I. So,
and it was, again, I hate, because I am, just for full disclosure, I'm a very big Donald Trump fan. I never was before, even during the primaries, I was not. But once he became the candidate, then I backed him. But I can say I have never been more pleased or pleasantly surprised or proud of It Is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. That is what
about that after.
Yes, that's a different subject for a different time.
Trump. I just read a book on China, Chaos Under the Sun. If you read that, you may take a different take on him, have a different take on him with regard to China. But anyway, let's not get off on that tangent.
Yeah, I didn't send it. I just wanted to preface that by saying that was Hitler's rhetoric was Germany first.
Right.
Germany first. We're going to get Germany back on its feet.
Right. Well, they were nationalists, obviously. I mean, that's
right.
And people, they needed something, and here was a guy that came along that was offering something.
And nationalism isn't a bad thing.
Right.
It can be a bad thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing.
These are the
what are the morals of the nation?
Yeah. All right. So now that we've laid the table for that, we have Helmut is a kid, and tell us what in 1937.
So in 1937, by 1937, the police state had become more and more conspicuous. Let's say private ownership of firearms was now gone. The big business and basic infrastructure of the country was becoming more and more regulated. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
It was becoming very, and so as that began to happen, there began to become more and more political strife among the citizenry. You had the Communist Party was a very powerful influence, or the Workers' Party. So among church members, more and more church members were becoming outspoken anti-Nazi. Which of course the Nazis had a plan for that. Yeah. It was a very dangerous thing to be outspoken.
people had to knew that they were going to get tortured, maybe killed. And not just that, but their family members would be tortured and maybe killed. And
yes, there's a word that everybody should look up because it's very relevant to the story. You have to understand the German word Sippenhof. What Sippenhof means is that it's legally, your family and loved ones can be legally liable for your crimes. Mm-hmm. It's a very big deal. So when you commit a crime, you're not just endangering yourself, you're endangering your family. Mm-hmm. So it's a big deterrent, but the members of the church were starting to become targeted. You hear about the Jews being targeted, but what you don't hear that much about are the Catholics, Lutherans, Methodists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, anybody who was outside of what the Nazis' ideal German citizen would be.
You can't have a religion if you have an all-powerful government. They want total allegiance.
They're diametrically opposed.
I had a Cuban on who was under Castro, and I had a Romanian on who was under Ceausescu. It's the same thing. Anytime you have a totalitarian government, religion has to go. But it wasn't until this book that I realized that there's a part we're going to get to later because it's really, really touching. But where Otto, I think was he the first counselor or second counselor?
Otto Berndt served with Arthur Xander.
Right.
And then after the war, Otto Berndt served above Xander in a yes, regional presidency.
I get confused because he was later the equivalent to a stake presidency.
Right.
But when after his torture and everything, he was interrogated. After he's interrogated, and we'll get to that later, the Nazi that interrogated him turned to him and said, we have a plan for you Mormons, and you're gone after, you're going to go just like this. And he was like, what? Like it totally shocked him. And so many people like him really wanted Germany to lose the war. Can you imagine that, being in a country and rooting against it in war because you could see where it was going? I mean, what a position these people were in. I can't even imagine what that was like.
Yeah, Otto Berndt was quoted as saying many times to people, you'd better pray we lose.
Yeah. You
had better pray we lose. Yeah, Otto Berndt was arrested shortly after the three boys had been detained and interrogated just because of his leadership in the church. And he was very good at convincing the Gestapo interrogators that he had no knowledge of it. Yeah. And they held him for several days, maybe a week. And then when they let him go, the conversation came up. He was trying because he was trying to make sure that there wasn't going to be any more trouble for him or his family. And he said, "Are you now convinced I had no knowledge of this?" And he quoted the interrogator as saying, "If we had any thought that you might have been involved, you would not be leaving this building alive." Mm-hmm. And that's when he said, "And when we're done with this war and we're done with the Jewish problem, you Mormons are next." Yeah. That's a direct.
I can't imagine how chilling. All right. So we're getting off on.
So by 1937, back to the timeline, by 1937, the police state was becoming more and more conspicuous, including strangers appearing in congregations. They were just government spies. They weren't even covert about it. Mm-hmm. They would place people in places of work, places of worship, even family gatherings, neighborhoods, youth centers where kids would play, like what today we call the YMCA. There were eyes and ears everywhere.
That's a little bit like FBI right now, doesn't it?
It was kind of, it was kind of like
prevalent, but it's the thing.
It was J. Edgar Hoover kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they were looking for signs of anti-patriotism. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of Mormons, a lot of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I use Mormon because that's the lexicon that people are familiar with.
That's what they used to call them back in the day. So let's just feel that we're going to call them that because that's what they were called back then. But
fair enough.
That now when someone asks us who we are, we say, "I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." I have to sing it every single time because.
And I always hear in my mind the song that President Benson sang, "I am a Mormon boy."
Oh,
it's just, but I'm proud of the nickname. I'm proud of Mormon, of who he was. I believe Mormon was a real person who walked on this continent, and he did an amazing feat. more on him later.
Yeah.
But yeah, by 1937, there were a lot of church members who were getting pretty tired of it, getting pretty tired of the espionage and the surveillance. This police state had now turned into a surveillance state. And so there were a lot of church members who were being harassed and a lot of church leadership that was being threatened. And so in 1937, I forget what month it was, but because things were developing quickly, in 1937, President Heber J. Grant toured Germany, and he spoke in several cities, including Hamburg. Now, 1937, Helmuth Hubener was only 12, but President Heber J. Grant, his basic message was an admonishment to the saints to not make trouble. Be good. This is what President Grant was saying, was be good patriotic citizens and do not make trouble for the church. Now, in no way is President Grant telling the saints, go ahead and be a Nazi.
Mm-hmm.
He's the prophet. He knows what he's doing is what he's saying, but we have to learn to read between the lines, or as Rush Limbaugh, I loved, he would say, you have to learn to read the stitches on a fastball. President Grant had a role to fill. He was the prophet of the church. His job was to protect the church and protect the work, protect the gathering of Israel. By no means was he saying, go along with an evil dictatorship who is out for extermination, including us when the time comes. So individual resistance and fighting the Nazis was a righteous thing to do, but not necessarily for everyone. Mm-hmm. I even think Arthur Xander, I think he went a little far when he posted Jews forbidden?
Well, tell us who Arthur Xander is, because not everyone knows who Arthur Xander is.
Okay. So Arthur Xander, he was the bishop or the branch president of their branch, or the bishop of the ward. And so that's a leadership position. In another congregation, he would say he's the pastor. Mm-hmm. And he was a member of the Nazi Party. He was a very patriotic, good German. He was also a very staunch convert to the church. And he loved they referred to him as the father of the branch. In fact, another side note, he baptized Rudy Wolbe and his mother. Mm-hmm. So they had that bond and connection that obviously soured years later.
Rudy was one of Helmut's best friends. He has two best friends that he got involved in his.
And Rudy was also as passionate. Karl-Heinz Schnibbe went along, and of course but he was always very much, he was kind of a lightweight. He really didn't want trouble, but he loved Helmut and he believed in what they were saying. Rudy was just like Helmut. He was of the same cloth as Helmut. He was like, screw these SOBs. We're going to take them down. And how Rudy avoided the death penalty, I don't really know.
Well, they said, remember, I don't know if you remember this, and we're jumping ahead a little bit, but when they were in the court, the people's court, or the blood court, as they called it, and they tried, that Helmut was really baiting the judges.
Yes.
And a lot of people thought that was because he wanted the lightning on him. He wanted them to come down on him, but to take some of the pressure off of the other two. And so that may be why Rudy didn't get it, because Helmut was basically like, became the lightning rod.
There's a lot of evidence that that's exactly true. Helmut was an assistant to his captors. He was very brazen. He was very in your face. He was never penitent. He was never apologetic. Mm-hmm. And that's another story, either for a different time or a different chapter of this conversation. But the courage, I mean, he was like a Benadai.
Yeah.
I'll
get there.
Yeah.
Right,
so in 1937, Heber J. Grant spoke, admonishing the saints, please do not make trouble for the church. Please just be good patriotic citizens and obey the law. Well, by late 1937, all church auxiliaries had been banned. All U.S. missionaries were out of Germany. The Boy Scouts were banned, replaced with the Hitler Youth, which most of the kids really liked. It was just like the Boy Scouts, except we learned how to use knives and guns.
Right.
And they also had a penal code where they could punish each other and put each other in jail, and even corporate punishment. Oh yeah, the Hitler Youth was all that. So, but it by 1938, just 1 year later, was the real turning point in Germany. That was the infamous Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. And that is where the Hitler Youth, largely organized by the Gestapo and the SS, they publicly targeted Jewish synagogues, businesses, and even private homes. People were dragged into the street, urinated on, kicked, beat, houses burned. And that was the, if you watch the documentary, Karl-Heinz Schnibbe was interviewed in the documentary. For him, that was a big turning moment for him, and for Helmut, and for Rudy, and for a lot of people. They were not on board with that, but they still, in their wildest imagination, never could have dreamt up Auschwitz.
Yeah.
Were they being persecuted? And yes, they knew that, but nobody knew about the concentration camps and the extermination.
Right.
That wasn't until 1945, 3 years after Helmut had been killed.
And jumping ahead again a little bit, they asked Rudy later, would he have done the same thing over again? And he said, yes.
Absolutely.
And especially because, they talked to them in the 70s and the 80s and 90s. Several people talked to them.
Yeah, isn't that awesome?
Years. Yeah, I know. I just wish one of them was still alive. But they, in hindsight, especially after seeing Auschwitz and everything, I'm sure they're like, I wish I would have done more, because
I told you.
I know.
I'm sure from the other side of the veil, Helmut was screaming, I told you, I told you, I told you they were bad guys.
Yep. So Kristallnacht, despite the fact that the name sounds lovely, was horrible, and it gave them all, a real eye-opening to what was actually going on and where it was going to head.
Well, that was when the hand of the Nazis, or the hand of Satan, was truly revealed. Mm-hmm. The skirt had been pulled up. Yeah. This is who we are. This is what was going on. And so now Helmuth Hubener was only 13. He was still very young. But it was shortly after that where he started the process of gathering information. And then when he was, I think he was 14 or 15, he got a job at a public administration building. Mm-hmm. And he had access to a lot of forbidden books that didn't make it to the burn pile, that were just kept as either evidence or, so Helmut started illegally trespassing and stealing books. And he was reading books that he wasn't supposed to be reading, and getting all kinds of crazy ideas in his head, and listening to the BBC. And then he would compare and contrast what he was learning and hearing with the news that they were only allowed to listen to.
Yeah, that was huge, because in Germany they were forbidden from listening to anything other than German stations, and of course that was
you could go to jail.
Yeah, yes. It was all propaganda, and so if you wanted to listen to anything else, you had to sneak a shortwave radio somewhere, because that was the only thing that could pick up BBC, anything from any place else besides Germany, right? Like, I think it's a medium wave could only pick up, I don't know that much about radio.
Right. Well, and they had jamming equipment. It didn't always work, but they were trying to jam those transmissions.
So he starts hearing BBC, and he's like, whoa, wait, these guys have so much detail about these battles. And yet when you listen to the German propaganda, it's always, we won, Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
And we bombed this boat. And he says, they talked about this boat like 10 times, like the same boat over and over. Like, why are they telling us the same thing every single time? Because obviously they're not winning as much as they're pretending to be winning. And yet so he's hearing the truth from the BBC. And this is where I start seeing when I was reading the book, I'm starting to feel the parallels. Like, how can people not see, if you're reading enough information and you're seeing enough information, all you have to do is pick up your phone and start Googling and start reading. How can you not see what's really going on instead of just buying everything that you're being fed, right? From the government or from YouTube or wherever.
Well, and Beck, you mentioned that word again, the parallels to today. See, by 1938, the year of the Kristallnacht, by 1938, now all church auxiliaries had been banned. No more priesthood, no more relief society. Now the church can own their own property, and meeting times were limited. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
And I think it was Mark Twain that is quoted famously as saying, history may not always repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And so we see a lot of efforts to disrupt brotherly unity overall in society. We have been ripped apart. Families, church members, co-workers, friends, we have been ripped apart by everybody's got an opinion about vaccines and masks and this and that, and it just breaks my heart. And it makes me angry, but that's exactly what just tears us apart further, is getting angry. We can't. Yeah. But yeah, in Nazi Germany, to be a member of the church or to even be a citizen, it wasn't all LDS who hated Nazis. There were lots of German citizens who hated Nazis. You just couldn't say anything. There's a very famous group, the White Rose group, you're probably familiar with, Hans and Sophie Scholl. There's a lot of evidence that Hans and Sophie Scholl got a lot of their information from Helmuth Hubener. They were older than Helmuth Hubener, but Helmuth Hubener preceded them in his resistance activities. And unfortunately, Hans and Sophie Scholl met the same fate, and many of the people who worked with him, but they were college students. Helmuth Hubener, he was 17, he was 16 when he was doing this, which is what really deflected a lot of suspicion from him. He's too young.
Yeah.
How could he?
But they kept thinking there had to be some adults behind this. Who were?
Oh,
they're like it was a grand conspiracy with all these adults, and it was really just coming from this one kid.
Well, and it's also it's a funny fact in the story of his writing was so witty and funny because Helmut grew up a very personal hatred for Goebbels, for Goering, for Hitler himself. And so he would personally insult them, especially Goering, because he was fat. And so he would come up with all these insults and funny ways of writing and describing the way they talked and the way they looked and the way they spoke, and even got some snickers out of some of the judges. And you know, to a point where the head judge had to bang his gavel and demand for order. And in an ironic twist, that's kind of what further sealed their determination to execute him, because their justification was he displays a far advanced mind. We got
to take this guy who knows the truth when he hears it and can attack the people, the liars, very effectively. We got to get rid of him, right? They
were wishing that he was on their side. It's like this is who we need. We need a kid who's this sharp and this articulate and can spin something. But Helmut, that's the irony though. Helmut Hubener wasn't spinning it. Helmut Hubener was unspinning it.
Yeah.
And they hated him for it, but he displayed a very advanced intellect.
Right. So for those that don't know the story, he started typing up these. First, it started out with little like posters or leaflet or like little posters. And it was funny that they said that he had the stamp because he worked for the government. He had the official Nazi stamp and he would put it on. He would put it onto his little flyers. And so when you would, from a distance, you would think, oh, that's some Nazi, official Nazi material. Get up there and start reading it. They were probably really confused. Like, why is this Nazi material telling us that Hitler's lying to us? Why is it telling us that we're losing the war? You know, that must have been really confusing, but I love the irony of that.
Yeah.
Because probably people walked by it and didn't even look at it because they thought, oh, it's more Hitler, it's own Nazi propaganda or whatever. But so he starts out just writing these flyers saying, hey, you know, you're being lied to. And then it becomes more leaflets, like long, like pamphlet type material where he gets into a lot of detail about how they're losing the war, how there's no way they're going to win this war. And you're all sending your men out there and we're going to have widows and orphans for no reason because they're going to lose this war. And his hope, I think, was that people would start waking up and there would be sort of people would rise up like a revolution and end it. I think that was.
I'm not sure that he was a brilliant kid, but he was also very young. And like a lot of our endeavors when we're young or even old, a lot of times we don't really know where we're headed when we start off. And I don't know that Helmut Hubener, you know, because that's another question that I think is an interesting question. If Helmut Hubener had really known what his ultimate fate was going to be, would he have done it?
Yeah.
Part of me thinks yes. He was a brave little kid. And that's another reason why I think the story is fascinating, because he displays one of the rarest human traits there is, and that is courage. We all want to be popular. We all want to be loved. We all want to be with the in crowd. And Helmut Hubener, he didn't care obviously he cared what people thought of him, because like in the letters that he wrote before his execution, you know, he the one surviving letter, what was that family's name? That had been like a second family to him.
Was that the Summerfield?
Yeah, Sommerfeld, the Sommerfeld family. He said, you know, he thanked them for all of their kindness and the many hours he spent in their home, and he said, I hope you will remember me kindly. And he says, it was my Christian duty to do what I did, and our Heavenly Father will be the true judge in these matters. And that's where personal revelation comes in. Yeah. If we were always supposed to follow the law, well, then we never would have had a George Washington.
Yeah.
We never would have had in fact, I just posted something on Facebook today. I forwarded it to somebody else that posted. It started off with, it says, Moses' mother did not comply. Neither did Shadrach. And so you do have to stand up into the face of evil, but there's sometimes in this material world where evil has you cornered and will squash you if you just like sometimes Samuel the Lamanite gets away, sometimes Abinadi burns at the stake.
Yeah.
And I don't know that those are some of the questions. Those are some of the big questions I have when I'm out of this world, is why the inconsistency, and I think we'll understand that everybody has. That was one quote of Arthur Xander, of his, not really a justification, but an explanation as to why he was a Nazi. He said, I was going off what I understood and what I believed and felt at the time. And then he said, he was talking to Rudy Wolbe later in life. He said, we all have our life to live. We all have a role to play.
But I can understand where Arthur Xander was coming from to a degree. But I think the thing that was the worst, okay, the few things that he did that were beyond the pale or unacceptable for even someone who's just, trying to be a good guy, was sort of locking some members, I don't know if it was just a priesthood group or whatever, or the whole ward, into one of the rooms,
right,
and telling them, you need to follow the government, that kind of thing. And he wanted them to do this Hitler salute. And then also the other thing, of course, was when he posted that sign on the chapel door saying no Jews allowed because of the Nazis. And they had a Jewish member that came up, saw that, and went away in tears.
He wasn't just a Jewish member. He was friends with Helmut, Rudy, and Carl. But again, and I'm not defending Xander or those actions, but I'm trying to put it in context.
Mm-hmm.
There were spies in the congregation, and they were checking up on congregations. And Arthur Xander was trying to keep his ward together. He was trying to keep them from being disbanded and completely dissolved altogether by the government. So he was trying to show that we were good, patriotic Germans. We were, but of course, then someone would ask, but how could you possibly? And I just don't know. The answer is we just don't know.
Well, since we're on that topic right now, I'm going to go to, we'll come back and we know what happened to Helmut. He was put to death, and we'll get to that, how he got caught and everything. Youngest person to ever be put to death by the blood court or the people's court. But in the back of this book in chapter 40, which I almost didn't read, and I'm really glad I got to, because it's really the best chapter in the book, because it actually gets to some of these meaty questions. And especially when he wrote this, this was, I think, 2004, 2005, well before what we're going through right now. And I'm guessing that this author never would have thought that this was something that we would have to deal with in this country. I mean, it's just not. But he talks about some of the interesting stuff about Helmut is great. What we talked about, how he only knew about democracy from the missionaries and from the church and that kind of thing. But then it talks about, what they were facing as members of the church back then, and how, some people think what Helmut did was wrong, because, he put his family in danger. His stepdad, right, Nazi, by the way, and his mom, who I don't know, they don't say much about her, but I'm not too impressed. He was, and actually the other interesting thing is that he was a product of rape. His mom was unmarried, at least that according to her, which, but anyway, it says, okay, on page 330, Mormons might face situations from time to time in various countries around the globe where the survivals of individuals or the very survival of the church as an institution would seem to dictate a policy of closed-mouthed neutrality. Unless specifically counseled by the prophet to do otherwise, to ride out the storm in situations where evil has already clearly, if temporarily, triumphed, it seems that members of the church would do better to err in the direction of being more concerned, rather than less, about the survival of those principles of freedom they hold dear. If his life and death had taught the world anything, if his legacy is to have any meaning, it perhaps ought to be that more responsible people should follow Helmut's lead, doing exactly the kind of things Helmut had the courage to do then, but doing them here and now, and this in other free countries around the world before, and lest the wicked rule. And then it goes on later The feeling more or less, and this is from Rudy, the feeling more or less among the members was that they would, he says more or less twice, it confused me. The feeling more or less among the members was that they would more or less tolerate it and try to stay out of trouble. Don't make waves. And then another lady says, the bottom line reason is that we don't want to make waves. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to meet at all. Rudy finishes their explanation. We were cautioned, don't make waves. Don't get too important. We might get noticed and then we're going to get tramped on. That was the general feeling. And so, and then later on, it goes down to talk about the 12th article of faith, which has come up a lot in the last 20 months.
Exactly.
Rudy analyzes his action in light of the article, expanding his comment used earlier in this volume. There are still some that think we offended the 12th article of faith, which I'd like to state here is not a commandment. It is a statement of our belief, and it is truly an American concept. We can never apply this to a Hitler, a Mussolini, an Idi Amin, all these murderous villains that are the heads of state. They are not ordained of God. I believe in the great gear work of the great clock in the universe. They have a place. They're put on earth at a certain time to be a scourge, to be a temptation, and to bring the Lord's plan to fulfillment in a negative way. Because the Lord knows in his great wisdom and his foreknowledge how certain individuals and spirits were to react upon this earth. Wasn't it Herod that killed all the children? Nero persecuted the early Christians and all these evil men. I wouldn't say they are foreordained, but they fit the great plan of salvation. Our Heavenly Father knows how they'll react under certain circumstances, and that's my belief. And then later on, he says at the end, he says, in conclusion, the inescapable topic to ponder is, should the churches always resist perceived tyranny in practice and not just in theory? For churches who wish to maintain their existence in dictatorial nations, their leaders have to and do face the dilemma of surviving for both the church as individuals and the church as an institution. While it is obvious to perceive Helmuth Hubener as a hero, the argument has been made even by other stalwart anti-Nazi German Latter-day Saints and friends of Helmuth, and in retrospect, there is a certain value in religious individuals merely obeying the laws of the land and allowing government to run its course in order that a higher mission, the activities of a church and its work on a spiritual plane, may take precedence over the more obvious, popular, perceived need for revolution, such as the overthrow of an immoral government. Thus, a mission of the church and perhaps other Christian religions has been to exhort its members to support and obey governments to whichever its citizens belong. If those governments be immoral, then the work of opposing and changing them legally, such as through elections by individuals who belong to the church, may be in order. However, in the case of the Nazis and Soviets, where once a government is in power and cannot be removed, the issue becomes more complex. Even in that case, the argument could be made that history should run its course and churches should not get involved in opposing certain governments because in the spiritual long term, those who conduct immoral acts within governments, such as Nazi and Soviet leaders, will eventually be held accountable before God anyway, while the mission of churches in each country is to quietly carry on spiritual work and to operate in such a manner that churches do not threaten to topple governments in order that governments will not retaliate by destroying churches. Adding further complexity is the question, at what point should one resist the government? In the Mormon Germans' case, would they have been justified to fight the government if they had known of the Jews' extermination or known of their own pending extermination? Another debate centers on the issue, and this is one of the points that I often make. The issue of individual conscientious objection. One side may argue that individuals should conscientiously oppose and fight evil governments, while the opposing side may argue that if enough individuals from a certain religious community, like, oh, those Mormons are known for this, fight or oppose a government, they may threaten the overall religious society to which they belong by causing that religious society to be perceived by the government as their enemy. One theory has it that it is our responsibility to resist evil categorically and thus sacrifice one's organized religion on the altar of principle. Another is to simply allow the governing body within a religion to determine such policies, since they are in perhaps the best position to determine when and when not to resist, as their particular organization is at stake. Latter-day Saints believe a prophet who is at the head of their church makes policy for the overall membership, and that the Lord will protect his church and its members through that prophet. This all sounds like 2020 and 2021 to me.
Right.
In any case, Helmuth's work as a religious activist has been seen by certain idealists as productive, and yet again by certain pragmatists as counterproductive. But no one can doubt his sincerity, purity of heart, and magnificent heroism. So that section, like I highlighted almost every single line in that section because it was like, oh my gosh, this is today. We have this debate within our church and within other Christians and their friends that are not Christians. And it's the really huge questions. And I'm not going to pretend to have the answers to this, but I think we should all be having this discussion in an open and honest way. And we're not all going to reach the same conclusions. But what I want to say right now, and this is purely from me, my impressions, but it jibes with some of the stuff that's in here. Last year, when the churches shut down and our church didn't push back, I was very upset about that. I mean, this is obviously a First Amendment, a huge First Amendment violation, right? And so I thought, my question was why is our church not pushing back on this and saying, no, we're going to stay open? I mean, some churches were staying open. In California, there was a huge church. They ended up winning a legal battle.
Right.
And so I had a really hard time with this. And so I did a lot of meditating on it. And the answer that I got, this is my own, again, personal revelation is personal. And so, but the answer that I got was that if we didn't go along, that members would be persecuted. And it wasn't time for that to happen yet. And this was during, we had the summer of these riots, Black Lives Matter, Antifa. And the thought came to me, what if our temples started to be pulled down? Or what if things, things were going to happen? I don't know what would have happened. That was the answer that I got. And I didn't like it, but at least it made sense. Yeah. Well, more recently, when we were urged to take the vaccine, this is the second time, right? The first, the prophet said, pray about it, talk to your doctor. And I was like, I don't want it. I don't want it. So I didn't really pray about it much, kind of half-heartedly prayed about it, didn't do it. Then the prophet again came out and urged it. And I was like, I can't ignore this. And so I really did start praying about it. I did. And again, when I meditated on it, it was like the same answer as before. He's asking us to do this to avoid being persecuted. As, oh, look at those Mormons out there. They're killing grandma because they're refusing to go along with the vaccine, right? And so I was pretty open on my podcast. I said I did finally go and get the vaccine just out of pure obedience to the prophet. And I don't, everyone else can do what they want to do, and everyone's got to follow their own heart on this. I then burned the vaccine card because I'm not going to go along with any place that requires a vaccine. I'm not playing into the system, and I'm not going to be getting any boosters. But, and I went in kicking and screaming. I mean, I rescheduled getting the stupid thing because I didn't want it. So we're facing kind of similar dilemmas now as they were facing then. How much are we as individuals, first of all, versus the church as an organization? The church as an organization is going to do what the church as an organization is going to do. And right now, obviously, it has been to go along with, the recommended COVID regulator, getting the vaccinated, wearing masks to some degree. The mask thing, I felt like we had a little more leeway on because they said, where you can't have a 6 foot distance. I'm like, hey, I go to church, like, you can 6 feet from me, not a problem. And right. So, the words are kind of half and half on that from what I've seen so far, from what people have told me. And it varies in different areas as well. But our church is mostly going along with it. If you watch General Conference, it felt like, a little bit like a PC thing. Our choir is all fully vaccinated, and they stay social distance from each other, and they made a big deal about that. Right now, you can't go into Temple Square and see the lights unless you show a vaccine card. That's their policy. If I was a Utah member, I wouldn't go. I just wouldn't go. So we have this dilemma, right, where the church is doing one thing and the members are doing something else. And so we have this divide where members are, picking at each other. We have members who are fully for the vaccine and fully for the mask, telling members that are not fully for those things, you're you're killing grandma. You're not listening to the prophet. You're doing this, you're doing that. And we have people on the other side saying, we don't trust the vaccine and we don't trust the government and we don't trust Dr. Fauci. And so we don't want to do these things. And so we are torn. I feel like our church is in large part doing these things to avoid persecution, but also like what the book said, the mission of the church is to stay, it's got to stay viable. It's got to be open. People have got to be able to come to it. And so it's trying to take a safe position that will allow it to stay open, especially in other countries. A lot of other countries are much more severe about these COVID restrictions. And so it seemed to me like the overall mission of the church right now is to just go along, to get along, and to keep the mission of the church moving forward. What are your thoughts?
When I see all this, to make it analogous to the Helmuth Hubener story, I see the picture of Hitler on the wall, and I see starting the church meeting by listening to the weekly broadcast of the Fuhrer. It's just a smokescreen and a disguise. Mm-hmm. I don't believe for 1 minute, I'm not speaking for him, I'm stating my opinion. I don't believe for 1 minute that President Nelson thinks that putting a cloth covering over your face is preventing the spread of any virus. I don't believe he believes that. I believe he is acting and doing things to protect the church under divine inspiration that he receives as prophecy and revelator. But I do not, just as I believe President Grant meant what he said when he said, don't make trouble for the church, follow the law and be good patriotic citizens. I don't believe he was saying, yeah, go ahead and be a Nazi. Go ahead and stomp on Jews that you see in the street. Go ahead and break their windows. Go ahead. He wasn't saying that.
There's a difference between being neutral and collaborating.
Exactly.
And so what he was saying is, try and be neutral here. But yeah, he would never say collaborate. He would never.
But there's a point though. There's a point where inaction and not doing anything is compliance. And so, like we always say, well, is it ever okay to lie? Well, of course not. You should always be truthful. So we heard that you're hiding Jews. Well, guess what you do? You lie your ass off, right, and you hope you don't get caught. And if you do get caught and you get beaten, interrogated, and killed because you were hiding Jews, there's a special place in heaven for you.
Right.
That's just Jimmy's take on it. Other people can do what they want. And if I was in a position of high leadership in the church, area presidency or regional or general authority, I would say what I had to say as that calling dictates. But I'm not. I'm a primary teacher and I'm a temple worker, so I'm a little bit more. I'm allowed to be a little bit more of a libertarian loudmouth.
Well, and that's where there's a difference between what the church is doing as an organization and what we are doing as individuals, right? I'm very outspoken on my radio show and on my podcast. The church is not going to come out and say these things, but I'm going to say them. Although I will say we did, it's funny when the church was first shut down, and I remember there was a ward member talking to me about it, and he said, well, it's not a big deal because we already have, this at-home church, right? The church foresaw this. And I said, yes, you are right that we do have that. But who decides how we worship? Is it the president or the governor, or is it us? And he's like, well, I said, no, the point of the First Amendment is us, right? And so Elder Bednar came out in this, like a week later with that, I can't remember what symposium it was or whatever, but he talked about, don't ever let this happen again, that this was a big violation of the First Amendment. And this man in the ward was a big man because he sent it to me and he said, you're right. He said, look at this, Elder Bednar. So I said,
good for him.
Yeah.
Well, and another point along those lines is that if a governor or a mayor can just say, well, you have to close your business and you have to do, well, then why do we even have legislatures? Mm-hmm. If the president can just make the law, then why do we have a House of Representatives? Yeah. And that's what I think a lot of people are losing sight of. I feel we're being gaslighted. The heat's just being turned up very, very slowly, and we're just going along with it. And just like the German citizens were, it was happening. I mean, especially after 1938, Kristallnacht, it became, things progressed very quickly. But today we have to be dumbed down much more cleverly and slowly because we're armed and we have that pesky Constitution that stands in their way. And there's a lot of, well, our Constitution, it may hang by a thread, but it's never going to fail.
Mhm.
The government, we've been told, is probably going to fail, but it's.
I did a few episodes on this, and it's going to keep going on. We're going to keep having this discussion because things are only going to get worse. We know that. I think that the Constitution surviving doesn't necessarily mean that the United States government survives as a constitutional republic. I think
exactly.
that the philosophies of the Constitution survive. And even if it means that we end up in tribes, if you're in a tribe that believes in constitutional principles, the Constitution has survived, right? Because whatever happens, whether we end up in with cascading secessions, for some reason, I can see that as one of possibility. I mean, Texas may go. If Texas goes, I can see some other states going. And if that happens, if you're in one of those states, then you're going to work really hard to make sure the Constitution survives in your state or your new country or whatever it is. And so I think it survives that way, even if that doesn't mean that the US government survives. And that
I agree completely.
It was a hard thing to accept when I finally made that realization. But because, we were born and raised to love this country. And you and I are old enough to remember 1976 and the spirit of 76 and how, patriotic. I've always been patriotic. I've always loved the flag. I've always loved singing the national anthem. It's a huge thing for me. I've always loved this country. But when you get right down to it and you start seeing things like Brandon in office here doing the stuff that he's doing, it's not the country. It's the ideals behind the Constitution. Those are the things that we yearn for, that we love, that we revere. And so if the country falls, it's sad, but it's not that thing that we love that we're going to lose. It's the Constitution survives as long as you live in a community, a country that embraces the constitutional principles and lives by those.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
The story, man. Let's finish the story for people that haven't read this book yet.
Well, yeah. What I'm hoping this conversation will do is encourage people to read the book and to at least watch the story by Matt Whitaker, the documentary, is
True thinking.
It's hard to turn away from once you start watching it, but it's the book's even better. A lot, especially the appendices. Also, there's so many stories. There's so many characters in the story whose lives and post-war lives are relevant, mainly to members of the church, but even but there's several biographers, German biographers, that did a story on Helmuth Hubener, who in the 1960s, when they discovered the story, were shocked that they had never heard of him before, and then did a lot of. One is named Günter Grass, and he wrote a really neat biography about Helmuth Hubener and other resistors like the Scholl siblings, but Helmuth Hubener is a rare breed of human. Could have just been because he was so young and he didn't have any children or other families responsible, but he basically set himself up as a martyr. He knew there is evidence that suggests that he probably didn't think he would ever be caught. He was a pretty
he's kind of cocky. I mean,
he's a pretty cocky little kid. Yeah, especially
his weaknesses were probably his cockiness. I mean, he was 16, I did stupid things when I was 19, or I was either 18 or 19. And my friend had, I was thinking, oh, teenagers do stupid things. Yeah, I can remember one myself. My friend had leased her truck out to another person, and they had this agreement. You're gonna lease my truck and you're gonna pay X amount every month. And they'd gone through a third party to do it, another company. Well, the company went out of business and the guy stopped paying and refused to give the truck back. So I had this bright idea. I said, I'm going to go get that truck back for you. I'm going to repo this thing. In a million years, I wouldn't do this right now. It was so weird. So I'm 18 or 19, I don't remember. And we go to this guy's house. She still has the key because, it was her truck. So I go in, I see the garage doors open halfway. So I go in and I'm like, all right, I turn the key on this thing. I start backing it out and the guy comes running out of his house. I'm like, oh, I'm out of here. I pulled this thing out. I took off, the garage door was barely high enough to get the truck out, but I took it, I repoed it for her and I got it back for her. And, the whole rest of the night we're like watching for cops because pretty sure that was illegal and I could have gotten in some trouble for that. But I think when we're that age, we do stupid things and we don't think down the line very far. He probably didn't think he was going to get caught. And remember, he and Rudy and what was the other name?
Karl-Heinz Schnibbe.
Carl, right. Yeah. Agreed that if any one of them got caught, they would take the blame for all three. And so they had that deal made ahead of time. One of the most touching things was when after Helmuth got picked up, and they were all three in this prison, and he was walking by with Carl, I think, and they weren't supposed to see each other. It was an accident. They somehow were passing each other in the hallway. And Helmuth was all beat up, of course, because they all got beat up. And when they were walking by, he just gave a little grin to Carl. So Carl knew that Helmuth had stuck to his guns and not giving up his friends, because the story was, Rudy and Carl just kind of said we didn't do much. We listened like one time to the BBC or whatever, and we weren't really involved with those flyers. And so Helmuth took all that blame onto himself. So he was arrogant, but yeah, like you said, he was brave as all get out. He knew in prison that he was going to be put to death. And
it's not just the death sentence. It was the way he was treated, especially after his conviction. All his human rights were taken away, which meant they didn't have to give him blankets. They kept him chained to a block wall. There's a lot of details in the story that are very difficult to read. Yeah. The way not just these young men, but the way people can treat other people.
Oh, it's amazing. It's just amazing that anyone can do that to anyone else.
Yeah, they were treated in a way that I couldn't treat a child rapist that way. Yeah. I could kill him, but I couldn't chain him to a block wall in an ice cold cell in Berlin in winter for months at a time.
Right.
With no food and barely enough. And I just people's capacity to be cruel and vicious it's breathtaking. But there's a lot of details in the book that are difficult to get through, but I still think it's important for people to read. It helps you understand what some people have gone through for the sake of freedom.
Yeah. That
we just take for. I imagine Hubener living today, with guns and rights and the Constitution, and he'd be like in a fantasy land.
Oh yeah. Well, they said in the back of the book that he no doubt would have been a really model citizen, and he would have looked up all the candidates. He would have known who was what. He would have seen through a lot of the BS that we, see with these politicians. And, he wouldn't have had to do what he did, but he would have been, he would have been in paradise.
Yeah. He was only a troublemaker because he just happened to be born at a time and a place at the wrong time, at the wrong place.
Well, and the thing that I really relate to about him is that once he heard the truth, he couldn't not share it.
He couldn't ignore it. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people must have had that capacity back then, or else they just, it was easy to close your eyes, because if you just listen to the propaganda and you never bothered to try and, go listen to the BBC, you could just merrily go along and act like everything's fine, although Kristallnacht, I don't know how anyone ignored that.
That was a big awakening for a lot of people. Because again, it wasn't just the Jews. It was the Jehovah's Witnesses. It was Catholics. It was anybody who wasn't on board with the being a Nazi. Mm-hmm. Everybody was looked at with suspicion. Hey, you didn't show up to the meeting. Hey, we see in your building here you don't have a picture of the Fuhrer. Why is that? And they were allowed to bully and intimidate and interrogate people. They didn't have civil rights the way we think of civil rights. Nope. If you pissed off a Gestapo cop, he could just slam you right in the street. They didn't care. You weren't going to. You couldn't call Jacoby and Myers to go sue him for, And I think that's another thing that's lost on a lot of people these days. Everybody thinks, that they can. I don't have to get a job. I'll just be a YouTube star. And then if somebody makes me angry, I'll sue them and I'll be rich that way. They don't live in the real world. We don't, this Nazi Germany was a great representation of the real world.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have any rights. They're bigger, they're stronger, they have the guns, and that's it. And Helmuth Hubener, I don't know. Would Germany have lost the war without Helmuth Hubeners? Of course they would have. But like this author Günter Grass points out, it was the Helmuth Hubeners and the Hans and Sophie Scholls of Germany that allowed Germans to recover in their conscience.
Mm-hmm.
Had there never been a Helmuth Hubener or a Hans and Sophie Scholl, this is what Günter Grass says, I don't know how we could have lived with ourselves.
Yeah.
We at least knew that there were a lot of us that were against this, and a few of us who actually had the guts to speak up. Like back to like the Pixar movie Bug's Life.
Right.
What was the one ant that stood up to Hopper and his gang? It sometimes it just takes one little spark to start,
Mm-hmm.
which is what, if you can see by Hopper's example, when he's in the bar with his buddies and he says, here, I throw that at you, did it hurt? No. And then he unleashes the entire jug of all those seeds and it covers up their buddies, and all of a sudden his buddies get it. And he's like, they outnumber us 1,000 to 1 as soon as they get the idea. And that's what the Nazis were terrified of most. They weren't terrified of an armed resistance. They were terrified of somebody who smart with a typewriter.
Oh, that reminds me, we're going long, but there's just too much good stuff.
I know, way too much to unpack in the story in an hour and a half.
No, there are some really amazing stories in there of faith. And one of those is with Otto Bern when he was in there being interrogated. And it's because Helmut was using the church typewriter.
Yes.
And
some stationery.
Yeah, and so he was using church materials, and also because they couldn't understand how there had to be an adult behind this, because there's no way it was this good. Well, so when Otto was taken, he was really freaked out. He had no idea what was going on. He didn't know what Helmut was doing, and Rudy and Carl. But when you're taken by the Gestapo, that's scary as all get out. So he says, Otto reports in a 1974 interview, as I was sitting there in front of that room before they called me in, I was scared to death. So scared that I had to hold my knees because they were shaking. And I prayed to my Father in heaven. He tells Rudy, I prayed like I had never prayed before. Rudy adds that the Lord would let him say the right words. Continuing his interview, Otto states, I knew I had the feeling that my life was at stake as I was sitting there. And I asked my Father in heaven to bless me that I could go through this, what was ahead of me. And as they called my name and I went in that room, all the fear was gone. It was so quiet in myself that I could hardly believe it. I was sitting down, and this is as true as I sit here. I felt as if my spirit left my body and another spirit came and took possession of the body. And this spirit answered the questions. He told Rudy that he felt that the other spirit took over my thinking. For 3 days, I was thoroughly questioned by the Gestapo. I was asked hundreds of questions in rapid succession, and I should say the spirit or the higher power that had possession of my body, was able to answer them all without hesitation. I was very sure of myself. And Rudy adds, he told us later that he didn't even know what he was saying. Wrapping up his account of the interrogation, Otto states, after 3 days of questioning, the officers felt that I or the church I represented had nothing to do with the crime, in quotes, committed by these 3 young men. Otto later told Carl, after 3 days, they told me you can go home. In the course of the questioning, I was able to show that our church was not an American church and that we had nothing to do with the US government. All of the records had been confiscated by the Gestapo, were checked and later returned. When I was questioned by the Gestapo, I was told to see that the accused Helmut Gudat, which was his name before it was changed later, was to be cut off by the LDS church. That's something else we didn't get to yet, but some of the members wanted him excommunicated. The Gestapo wanted him excommunicated. The church had, I flatly refused to do this and explained to them that the church has no right to excommunicate him. In 1974, he reports, he also told the Gestapo, he will get his punishment from you, and we think that it's enough punishment for him. Why should we excommunicate him? Anyway, the part that just was astounding to me was that for 3 days, the spirit took over and got him through this thing, and he had no idea what to say. He didn't even recall what he said later. I just was.
Yeah, that's a powerful story.
It is. I mean,
and about the excommunication of Helmuth Hubener, there's also evidence. Arthur Xander, as pro-Nazi as he was, and I think silly as his efforts were to try to almost overdo it in showing that no, we are good. We're good citizens by putting up a picture of Hitler in the chapel and putting the no Jews. The excommunication process of Helmuth Hubener was just a simple paperwork exercise done solely by Xander. It wasn't done properly.
Yeah, he just like wrote it on his record, right? It never went to Salt Lake. It never went down the line.
It was just to appease the Gestapo. But just to be sure, after the war, the new mission president and organizer of the church in Germany, they went ahead and posthumously baptized Helmut and then did his endowment work. Right. So
people, I'm hoping that people will read this and understand it, and because there is that's a misunderstanding about him being excommunicated. Yeah. He technically wasn't.
No. So it's a court process. Excommunication is a court process. It's also excommunication, which is also widely misunderstood, is not used as punishment in the church. Right. Excommunication is part of a repentance process. Right. It's not used as, oh, we're really tired of you, so now you're excommunicated. To be excommunicated, you really have to want it. Right. And it's part of a repentance process.
It gives you the opportunity to be rebaptized. And I can see where if you have been sinning so grievously that you want a do-over, that it would be worth it to go through that whole process. Sure. People have been through the process, and yeah, that's worth it to them to go through that process, to be able to come back and enter the waters of baptism again. But right. I don't, just kind of starting to wrap this up. I wish that we knew whether Helmut had been praying about what he was doing, or whether this was just sort of a righteous indignation, like feeling that he's going to do this. I wish we knew. We don't really. I mean, the letter that he wrote to Sommerfeld said that he would be judged by Heavenly Father, but he also said, I did nothing wrong. I know that I did nothing wrong. Yeah. And the reason I want to know that is because we have the similar dilemmas today, right? How much are we supposed to stand up? How much is supposed to just go forward? I mean, I think a lot of people want to go along with what the prophet says because they want to be obedient, but don't want to violate their own conscience. And so there's a lot of personal revelation that has to take place. And it was this prophet who has been hammering into us that you're not going to survive these last days without personal revelation, which takes on a whole new meaning now with the things that are going on. But it raises that really big question. There's always going to be a really big question going forward. Is this the right thing to do right now? Am I supposed to be doing this? I don't always have the answer to that. I can only go by, what I feel.
Well, you just made me think of, there's a BYU professor who gave an amazing devotional within the last year and a half, a guy named Scott Miller. And the title of the devotional is Humble Uncertainty. And that devotional changed my life. He uses an analogy of the dark to, which of course, most people, when they think of the dark, they think of ignorance or evil. And he says he uses the analogy of the dark in that the dark is where faith promoting experiences take place. Because when we get to the end of the lighted path, we have, if we retreat and we stay in the light, we're not actually exercising faith. We're actually letting our faith lie dormant. And he says, it's only when we take a forward step into the dark and then wait patiently for revelation, which is where, and he uses some brilliant analogies of where that's where it wasn't until they stepped into the dark that Lehi found the Liahona, and that Moses found the promised land, and that the saints found Salt Lake. They had to venture off into the wilderness. And so there will be times where we just don't know what the right answer to do. Obviously, to follow the prophet is always the right answer. That's a simple, quick answer. But again, back to President Grant, when he's telling German citizens to be good patriotic citizens, when he's telling the German saints to be good patriotic citizens and follow the law, there's no way he's telling them to be a Nazi. Mm-hmm. We know he's not saying that. we have to read between the lines and see what our leaders are really telling us. President Nelson is telling us to seek personal revelation. I didn't hear in any of President Nelson's addresses that we need to go get a vaccine. What he says is we need to pray about it and do the right thing.
Well,
that's what I hear.
He urged us the second time. He says, "I urge you."
I didn't hear that. So,
well, I did, but
yeah.
It's going to be. I don't think it's going to be much any easier going forward. I think there are going to be things that are going to go against our logic, because our logic tells us something and our heart tells us something that may not be what God wants for us.
Yep.
That's going to be the hard part. This is why I posted one time, we talk about that. I've seen both sides use the whole wheat and tares thing against each other, right? Oh, well, this is separating the wheat from the tares. Oh, well, this is, both sides. Those who are saying that are getting the vaccine are telling those that aren't getting it, well, this is separating the wheat from the tares, isn't it? And the other side's saying the same thing. Well, what I posted not long ago is, you know what? I don't know. I don't know which side I'm on with the wheat and the tares. I'm trying to do my best, but I can't smugly sit back and say, yeah, wheat and tares here, people, because maybe I might be the tare sometime. And I don't want that. So I think we should always be, even if it goes against what we really want at the time or what we think should be right, we need to be asking God, what does he want?
Yeah, I don't think it's productive to have a fatalistic view of certain activities, like you do or you don't do this, you don't do that. If I have the vaccine, or my reasons for getting it or not getting it are no one's business.
Right.
And but on that note, I'll tell you, my doctor has advised me not to get it. My doctor advised me not to get it.
And I wouldn't, if I had a doctor advise me not to, just like if I had the natural immunity, I wouldn't have done it.
Well, to be more specific, what my doctor instructed me, he said, if you wind up deciding to get the vaccine, what you should do, he said, I strongly advise you to get tested for antibodies. He said, if you've had COVID within the last 6 to 12 months, there's a possibility you have very high antibody count. Mm-hmm. If you have a high antibody count, do not get the vaccine. Mm-hmm. It could make you very sick. If you want to get the vaccine, wait at least 6 months and then get retested for antibodies. Once the antibody count goes down, as it naturally will, then get the vaccine. Yeah, that's what he told me.
I had your doctor here. Those are America's frontline doctors type things, because I've had Dr. Barkey on several times, and that's what he said basically. Well, and anyway, we're not going to go down that road. It's too much time.
Right.
But so, we're just going to have to keep these discussions going, and people need to really, I think, stay open to the idea that they may not know what they're doing is right or wrong, and they're going to have to really seek personal revelation.
Well, and back to the example of Helmuth Hubener and his friends, and there were more than just his friends. Helmuth Hubener had recruited other people that Karl-Heinz Schnibbe and Rudy Wolbe only knew about later. Mm-hmm. Helmuth was quite active. He was, like I said, that's why there's a lot of evidence that he was the inspiration behind the White Rose Group, because he predated them by over a year.
Yeah.
But he acted on what he felt was his Christian duty. Mm-hmm. He did what Helmuth Hubener, he states in the letter to the Sommerfeld family, he forgave everybody who criticized him, who held him in critical views, and he felt like he did what was right. He felt it was wrong. And again, he died never knowing just how right he was. He died not having any idea of the Holocaust. So Helmuth Hubener, it's easy in hindsight to look at Helmuth Hubener and say, oh, there's a hero. But if you really put yourself in all the actors in this play, if you really put yourself in their shoes in that time frame, including Arthur Xander, there were other members of his ward who, when hearing news of their arrest, said, "I hope they burn, traitors." Yes, but you have to remember, they didn't know about the Holocaust.
Yeah,
they didn't know. They knew, so it's. We have to be careful. We have to use compassion and patience and realize that everybody is doing the best they can with the hand they've been dealt. Mm-hmm. That's one thing everybody on this planet has in common. We were all born into a set of circumstances that we did not create. Yeah. That's what we all have in common. Mm-hmm. And so if we can learn to view each other with even evil people, I don't know the circumstances under which Hitler was born, how he was raised, or why he, the the patriotism and the energy that he felt to do what he did. I don't know why. So I can't judge Kim Jong-un or Pol Pot or Mao. I mean, I want to judge them.
At some point, they all embraced evil.
Exactly. And if I had a beat on them, I'd pull the trigger.
Yeah.
But that's in this life. I'm talking about in the next life. Thank God, God will be our judge.
Yeah.
Because I think of some of the most embarrassing or worst things I've ever done. And I thank God every day that it's not widely known.
Yeah.
Because if it were, people's opinions of me would probably be quite different.
We're not talking about the acid wash clothing again, are we?
Oh no, far from that.
Just kidding.
Far from that. So
all right. So
sorry,
finish your sentence.
I would say, so I just think we should all practice compassion and kindness, especially among our brothers and sisters in church and family and coworkers. If you want to vote for Brandon and you think that's the way America needs to go, and that, hey, I disagree. Pass the potatoes, would you?
Right.
We just that's how it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I will say this, that's one thing that the left does not want. The left does not want us to just be tolerant and agree to disagree. And I would say to people who are on the left, isn't that one of your first clues? That should be a clue.
Yeah.
That should be a clue. I want peace, love, and harmony. Mm-hmm. I want peace, love, and understanding. And if you want to be a liberal, I consider myself a liberal. I consider myself a George Washington liberal.
Yeah, classical liberal.
A classical liberal, and meaning that I want you to think and feel the way you want to think and feel, and let me think according to the dictates of my own conscience. Where have we heard that from?
Yeah.
According to the dictates of our own conscience. That's also in the Articles of Faith, which, as Rudy Wolbe wisely pointed out, it's not a commandment. It's a statement of our beliefs.
Right.
But when you have evil dictators and evil states who are exterminating people, you have a Christian duty to speak up, speak out, and try to do something. If you can hide some Jews to save their life, you do it. And if somebody says, well, that's against the law, say, well, then I guess I'm an outlaw, aren't I? Yeah. But the 12th article, don't talk to me about the 12th article of faith.
Well, it seems to be the attitude that President, I was facing on his name all of a sudden, first counselor and President.
Irene?
No, second counselor. Then President, I can see in my mind's eye, the lawyer spoke on.
Dallin H. Oaks.
Yes, thank you. President Oaks.
Uh-huh.
His point in the last General Conference address on the Constitution seemed to be that we go through we act through legal means, through elections. And so this is another whole discussion that we're not going to have time to get into. But that it seems like the church's position is that we should only do things through legal means, that we shouldn't be obeying the law, which would be civil disobedience, which some of us got into a little bit and enjoyed.
Sure.
So anyway, I'm just going to leave it on this note. I don't know whether what Helmuth Hubener did was something that the Lord wanted him to do or not. I don't know whether it made a huge difference or whether it was the totally right thing to do, but I think it was awesome. And yeah. I think it's the kind of thing that I would have done, and I would have felt very strongly to do that. And I wish that he would have had women helping, because I would have been one of the women that would have. I don't know what would have happened to me with the Nazis picked me up. I hate to think about that, but I do not think I could have known that truth and not found a way to spread it in one way.
I identify with that. I think Helmuth Hubener, what he did was he raised a lot of awareness. He was a thinker, and he helped other people start to think, and he fertilized the soil for the idea in Germany after the war that we will not ever let this happen again. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at Helmuth Hubener through my Heavenly Father's eyes, there's a special place in my kingdom for him.
Yeah.
He was a courageous young man, and he paid an enormous price. And had he been in a different time and a place, he could have been a very useful tool for righteousness. But I believe he was. I think that's the beauty of the atonement. Everything gets fixed. Mm-hmm. I don't believe Helmuth Hubener's work is finished, just like I don't believe Joseph Smith's work is finished. Helmuth Hubener is a special soul. He's a special kind of people who Heavenly Father can use. because that kid had guts.
Yeah, you know what? And I wonder if he's still single.
I'm sure he is.
I also think that, you know, if I don't find the right guy in this life, then maybe in the next life, there'll be one of these dudes that spoke up during this Second World War, and you know, he's been waiting around for me. Anyway,
You know, your soulmate could be out there in some time or place.
you never know. All right. Well, I think this is officially my longest episode ever, and I don't regret it at all.
All right.
So, thank you, Jimmy. You brought a lot to the conversation, so I'm glad that you were willing to go along with this. And
Sure.
You have some passion for the subject, which is awesome.
I do. Thanks, Annette.
And thank you all for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness. And please reach out to me. You can email me at annette@annettetalks.com, follow me on Facebook, or find me on annettetalks.com. And thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.